Karen Whitmore's morning jog came to an abrupt halt when she spotted the gaping hole where her neighbor's pool used to be. Her designer athletic wear, still pristine despite 3 blocks of exercise, clung to her as she marched across the perfectly manicured lawn, her phone already dialing 911. "Yes, I need to report a theft," she announced breathlessly into the phone, ignoring the confused dispatcher's questions. "My neighbor has stolen an entire swimming pool. This is Grand Oaks subdivision, and I am the HOA president." What Karen failed to notice in her outrage was that Dave Mitchell was standing right there in his backyard, coffee mug in hand, watching contractors fill in the hole with dirt. He'd been planning this pool removal for months after his divorce settlement, but Karen had been too busy redesigning the neighborhood entrance signs to pay attention to the permits posted on his fence. "Ma'am, pools don't get stolen," the dispatcher said patiently. "Are you sure you're not mistaken?" "I am never mistaken," Karen shrieked, her voice carrying across 3 backyards. "I've been HOA president for 7 years, and I know every single thing that happens in this neighborhood." Dave set down his coffee and approached the fence. "Morning, Karen. Everything okay?" Karen whirled around, her perfectly styled bob whipping dramatically. "Where is it, Dave? Where's my pool?" "Your pool?" Dave raised an eyebrow. "Karen, that was my pool. I had it removed yesterday." "Impossible. I would have received notification of any major construction projects. The HOA bylaws clearly state. I filed all the permits 3 months ago." Dave interrupted, pulling out his phone to show her the documentation. "Sent copies to the HOA office, just like the regulations require." Karen's face flushed red as she scrolled through the emails on Dave's phone. There it was: permit approval, contractor scheduling, even a courtesy notice about potential noise disruption. All properly filed, all completely ignored by Karen's assistant, who'd been instructed to handle the boring paperwork. This doesn't change anything," Karen stammered, her authority crumbling like a sandcastle. "Pool removal requires a unanimous HOA board vote." "Actually, it doesn't," Dave said calmly. "I checked the bylaws. Pool removal is considered maintenance, not modification." Karen felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Metaphorically speaking, though the contractors were indeed shifting quite a bit of actual ground nearby. For 7 years, she'd ruled Grand Oaks with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove of passive-aggressive neighborhood newsletters. Nobody questioned her decisions, nobody challenged her interpretations of the rules, and nobody certainly didn't consult her about major backyard changes. "We'll see about that," Karen snapped, turning on her heel so sharply that her ankle twisted slightly. She limped back toward her house, already composing the emergency HOA meeting notice in her head. Dave watched her go, shaking his head. He'd lived next to Karen for 5 years, enduring citations for grass height, mailbox color violations, and that infamous incident with his non-regulation garden gnome. But this time, he'd done everything by the book. As Karen slammed her front door, she didn't notice the small crowd of neighbors who'd gathered to watch the show. Mrs. Patterson from across the street was already on her phone, undoubtedly spreading the news of Karen's public meltdown. The pool incident, as it would come to be known, was just beginning. Karen's home office looked like a legal war room by noon. HOA bylaws, neighborhood covenants, and property surveys covered every surface. Her laptop displayed 17 different tabs of municipal codes, and her printer had been working overtime producing evidence. She'd called an emergency HOA board meeting for that evening, but first, she needed ammunition. Bethany. She called to her college-aged daughter, who was home for spring break. "Get in here and help me research property boundaries." Bethany appeared in the doorway, still in pajamas despite the late hour. "Mom, are you seriously going to war over Dave's pool?" "It's not about the pool," Karen insisted, spreading a property survey across her desk. "It's about maintaining order. If we let one homeowner ignore proper procedures, the whole neighborhood will descend into chaos." "He got permits, Mom. I heard you yelling about it this morning." Karen waved dismissively. "Permits can be forged. Property lines can be manipulated. I've been president of this HOA for 7 years, Bethany. I know when something's fishy. Karen hung up and immediately Googled herself. The results were devastating. Video clips of her 911 call had been leaked somehow. Probably by that dispatcher who'd sounded so smug. Memes were already circulating. Karen versus Pool. The Battle of Grand Oaks. Someone had created a fake missing poster for Dave's pool. But the worst part was the comments. Hundreds of people sharing their own HOA horror stories, with Karen cast as the villain in each tale. Her reputation, carefully cultivated over years of community involvement and charitable work, was crumbling in real time. I have to fix this, she muttered, pacing her living room. But first, she needed to understand how everything had gone so wrong. Karen drove to the HOA office, a small space she rented in a strip mall, and demanded answers from her assistant, Melissa. The young woman had been handling routine paperwork for 2 years, and Karen had never questioned her methods. "Where is David Mitchell's pool permit application?" Karen demanded. Melissa pulled up the files on her computer. "Right here. Filed on February 15th, approved March 1st, construction scheduled for April 10th. Why wasn't I notified?" Melissa looked confused. "It's in your weekly email summary. Every Friday, remember? You told me you didn't need to approve routine maintenance requests." Karen grabbed the laptop and scrolled through months of emails. There it was, buried in weekly reports she'd been skimming or ignoring entirely. Pool removal, permitted and approved, right alongside tree trimming requests and fence repairs. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a conspiracy or a cover-up. This was her own negligence, her assumption that nothing important happened in Grand Oaks without her direct involvement. "Melissa," Karen said slowly, "how many permit applications do we process monthly?" "About 30 to 40. Most are routine stuff. Deck repairs, landscape changes, pool maintenance." Karen had been signing off on these reports for years without reading them, trusting that Melissa would flag anything unusual. But Dave's pool removal hadn't been unusual, just routine maintenance that Karen had overlooked in her busy schedule of citation writing and rule enforcement. Her phone buzzed with another news alert. The story had been picked up by national media outlets. "HOA president calls police over legal pool removal," was making rounds on social media platforms. Karen sank into her office chair, watching her carefully controlled world spiral beyond her grasp. The pool was gone, the permits were legitimate, and she'd made herself a laughingstock on national television. But Karen Whitmore hadn't been HOA president for 7 years by giving up easily. Karen spent the weekend in strategic retreat, declining phone calls and avoiding social media while she planned her comeback. By Monday morning, she'd crafted what she believed was the perfect solution, a complete overhaul of HOA notification procedures that would prevent future miscommunications. She called another emergency board meeting, this time at the community center where she couldn't control the audience. Word had spread beyond Grand Oaks, and local news crews were setting up outside when Karen arrived in her most authoritative business suit. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, facing a packed room that included not just neighbors but reporters and curious onlookers. "I've called this meeting to address recent events and announce important policy changes." What Karen didn't know was that Dave had been documenting her increasingly erratic behavior for months. The citation for his excessively green lawn during a drought. The complaint about his dog's aggressive barking. The dog was elderly and barely whimpered. The formal warning about his garbage can being 3 inches too far from the curb. Dave had started recording their interactions after Karen accused him of hostile landscaping when he planted roses along their shared fence line. At 3 p.m., Karen marched to City Hall, a folder of printed emails clutched in her manicured hands. She demanded to speak to the permitting department supervisor, then the city manager, then anyone who would listen to her theory about fraudulent pool permits. "Mrs. Whitmore," said Tom Rodriguez, the long-suffering permits supervisor, "I personally approved Mr. Mitchell's application. Everything was in order. But did you physically verify the pool's existence before approving its removal?" Karen demanded. Tom stared at her. "Ma'am, we don't typically require proof that pools exist before allowing people to remove them. Well, maybe you should start. Karen slammed her folder on his desk. I have reason to believe David Mitchell never actually owned that pool. Karen, Tom said gently. He dealt with her complaints about neighbors' Christmas decorations, lasting too long into January. You've been doing this job for 15 years. Mr. Mitchell bought that house with the pool already installed. I have the original inspection reports right here. Karen's conspiracy theory was crumbling, but her determination only grew stronger. If the city wouldn't help her, she'd take matters into her own hands. That evening's emergency HOA meeting was standing room only, not because of Karen's dramatics, but because word had spread about the morning spectacle. Neighbors who hadn't attended a meeting in years showed up with folding chairs and popcorn. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen began, standing at the front of her living room like a prosecutor addressing a jury. We are here to address a flagrant violation of community standards and a possible criminal conspiracy. Jim Watson, the HOA treasurer, shifted uncomfortably. Karen, maybe we should start with the financial report. The financial report can wait, Karen snapped. Our very way of life is under attack. She launched into a 20-minute presentation, complete with printed photographs, property maps, and what she called timeline discrepancies. The audience grew increasingly restless as Karen's theories became more elaborate. So you see, she concluded triumphantly, David Mitchell has been planning this pool heist for months, possibly years. The room fell silent. Then slowly, old Mr. Henderson raised his hand. Karen, he said gently, I helped Dave's ex-wife pick out that pool 15 years ago. It was definitely there. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen's face went pale, then red, then purple. This meeting is adjourned, she declared, fleeing to her kitchen. By morning, Karen had convinced herself that the entire neighborhood was part of a conspiracy against her leadership. The reasonable explanation, that she'd simply missed Dave's properly filed paperwork, was impossible to accept. After 7 years as HOA president, admitting such a basic oversight would undermine everything she'd built. She stood in her kitchen, still in her silk robe, making her morning coffee and planning her counterattack. The local news was playing on her tablet, but she wasn't paying attention until she heard the anchor mention Grand Oaks subdivision. In a bizarre incident that has neighbors talking, local HOA President Karen Whitmore called police yesterday to report the theft of a swimming pool. Karen dropped her coffee mug. The ceramic shattered across her pristine kitchen floor, but she barely noticed. On screen was footage of Dave's backyard, with the filled-in hole clearly visible, followed by an interview with Dave himself. I just wanted to remove the pool after my divorce, Dave was saying to the reporter. Filed all the proper paperwork, got the permits, hired licensed contractors. I never expected this kind of reaction. The reporter turned to the camera. City records confirmed that all permits were properly filed and approved. The pool removal was completely legal and above board. Karen's phone started ringing. First her sister, then her book club president, then neighbors she hadn't spoken to in months. Each call followed the same pattern: initial concern, then barely concealed amusement as the story's details emerged. Karen, honey, said her sister Nancy, the clip is going viral on social media. #pool theft is trending. Dave Mitchell sat in the front row, arms crossed, flanked by neighbors who'd grown tired of Karen's increasingly authoritarian approach to HOA management. Behind them sat Jim Watson and the other board members, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. First, Karen continued, I want to clarify that my concerns about the pool situation were rooted in a genuine desire to protect our community's property values and maintain proper procedures. A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone in the back called out, You called the cops on illegal pool removal. Karen's composure flickered but held, which is exactly why I'm proposing new oversight measures. Going forward, all significant property modifications will require personal approval from the HOA president, regardless of permit status. The room erupted. Jim Watson stood up, shaking his head. Karen, we can't override city permits. That's not how HOA authority works. I've been president for 7 years, Karen snapped. I think I know how HOA authority works. Do you? Dave Mitchell rose from his seat, his voice calm, but carrying clearly through the room. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've forgotten that HOA presidents serve the community, not rule it. Karen felt the familiar flush of anger rising in her chest. I have served this community faithfully, by filing complaints about my dog's breathing patterns. Dave interrupted, by citing Mrs. Patterson for having a welcome mat that was the wrong shade of brown, by trying to ban children's sidewalk chalk because it violated your interpretation of community aesthetics. Each example hit Karen like a slap. Around the room, neighbors were nodding, some pulling out their phones to record the confrontation. Those were legitimate community standards. No, Karen, said Mrs. Patterson, standing up from her seat near the back. Those were power trips. The room fell silent. Mrs. Patterson was 78 years old, had lived in Grand Oaks since it was built, and had never spoken against Karen's leadership before. I've watched you turn our neighborhood into a place where people are afraid to plant flowers without checking a rulebook first, the elderly woman continued. Where children can't draw hopscotch squares on their own driveways, where neighbors spy on each other and file complaints about mailbox heights. Karen felt the walls closing in. I was protecting our property values. You were protecting your own need for control, Jim Watson said quietly. And this pool situation proves it. The board vote was swift and unanimous. Karen Whitmore was removed as HOA president, effective immediately. Jim Watson was appointed interim president until proper elections could be held. Karen sat frozen in her chair as the room emptied around her. 7 years of carefully constructed authority had crumbled in one meeting. The reporters were already filing their stories about the HOA president's dramatic downfall. Dave Mitchell approached her as she gathered her papers with shaking hands. Karen, he said gently, for what it's worth, I never wanted it to go this far. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I was just trying to maintain standards. I know, Dave said, but sometimes maintaining standards becomes more important than maintaining community. Karen drove home in silence, past the spot where Dave's pool used to be. The contractors had done good work. You couldn't even tell there'd been a pool there. New grass was already sprouting from the fresh soil. Her house felt enormous and quiet. Bethany had returned to college that morning, shaking her head at her mother's stubborn refusal to admit error. The HOA office keys sat on Karen's kitchen counter, waiting to be returned. As evening fell, Karen stood at her living room window, looking out at the neighborhood she tried so hard to perfect. Across the street, children were drawing with sidewalk chalk, something that would have prompted a citation letter just days ago. Mrs. Patterson was tending to her slightly overgrown garden, humming contentedly. The neighborhood looked exactly the same, but everything had changed, and for the first time in years, Karen Whitmore wasn't sure what came next. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the news story. HOA president position opening up in Meadowbrook Estates. Interested in discussing opportunities? They need someone with experience maintaining community standards. Karen stared at the message for a long moment, then slowly deleted it. Outside, Dave Mitchell was setting up a new garden fountain where his pool used to be. The sound of running water drifted through the evening air, peaceful and persistent. Karen closed her curtains and went to make herself dinner, wondering if 7 years of being right about everything had somehow made her wrong about everything that mattered. But that was a question for tomorrow. Tonight, she just wanted to sit in her perfectly organized living room and pretend that pools couldn't disappear overnight, taking everything else with them.